But nevertheless, we are going to see them this weekend. An interesting team that has been very good defensively this season. I think I have to double check. I'll just double check now. Yeah, they have the second best defense in the league behind Athletic Club. And they're doing it with a lot of injuries. And they had a really interesting summer in the fact that in the aspect that they made a lot of signings and increased their depth, which was timely and almost canceled or balanced out by the fact that they're just getting decimated with injuries. They're already missing Jesus Navas and Nesiri, who's a key goal scorer for them. Suso's out, Lamella's out. Diego Carlos came off the field against Wolfsburg, and he's a doubt now. So it's good that they have a lot of depth, but they're also missing a lot of key players. So where do you think, Jose, that this team, currently they sit at third place, 28 points, 2 points behind us. They have a game in hand over Real Sociedad, so they could leapfrog Real Sociedad when everything balances out. Do you think this team actually would have been even better had they had everyone healthy?
So that's an interesting question, because I feel that Sevilla didn't get much better. Like, their ceiling is not higher than last season, but they got more consistent because of how deep their squad is right now. If I do wonder how they'd be doing if En-Nesyri were healthy, because as has been the case with Sevilla for the last 2 years, like ever since he arrived to Sevilla, the team always has some goal-scoring problems. They lack fluidity in the final third, so it's the same story. It's always the same story. They are still a bit lacking in goal-scoring punch, and En-Nesyri was the one who was providing that. I think there's still a lot of merit to the fact that they produced their offensive production is the same as last year, even without En-Nesyri. So there is an argument to make that if En-Nesyri had not, especially if En-Nesyri and Navas had not been injured, they'd be a bit further up ahead in the table.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think they've already had a pretty good season, and the fact that they could have even been better. I mean, the fact that they've had the injuries they've had, I mean, the case for them being better also in conjunction to what you said is that, you probably don't want to overload Rakitic's workload at this stage of his career. So if he's going to be being more taxed, at some point, do they lead to burnout? And Nesiri won't be back until January, right? Something like that, I think it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Around January.
Yeah. So I do think, like, if he was in this team from the beginning, one of the interesting things when you look at the difference between Sevilla last season, this season, and the numbers, it's marginal, but they are marginally better offensively and defensively. One of the interesting things that stood out to me when you look at the differences is that they cross more than last year, which is not an easy thing to do given the fact that they cross 1 million times per game. So they're doing it even more. Yes. And I think if you put En-Nesyri on the end of like even a quarter of those, you're bound to get maybe a few more points at least out of that, I think. I mean, their results have been good overall, but like you look at, some of the games they've dropped points in. Alaves at home, they needed a late equalizer. In the Champions League, they haven't been as good as they've been in La Liga. They've lost at home to Lille. They drew away to Mallorca. So there are results like that I think could have been swung in their way if they had a presence like En-Nesyri.
Yes, and again, I think one stat that I found super interesting is the fact that in in this season, they've had 12 different goal scorers and 15 different assist providers. So in the absence of En-Nesyri, the load of goal scoring and assisting has been very spread out throughout the team. It also means that when Navas got injured, then it wasn't felt so badly. And I think, again, one thing that helps a lot with Sevilla this year is that, last year, if they lose En-Nesyri and Navas, their biggest goal scorer and their biggest assist provider, they'd be in real trouble. But right now they have very competent substitutes for them in the form of Rafa Mir, who Real Madrid already had to deal with in their games against Huesca last year, and Gonzalo Montiel from River Plate, who is also like a very good end-to-end fullback. So they have very competent substitutes now, and that allows the team to remain more consistent.
Do you think, like, to me it's a double-edged sword if you're Sevilla and you're going into a game imposing your style, because Lopetegui has a very clear identity in the way he plays, very fullback heavy, and in some sense it's difficult to play against that, especially if you have really capable wing backs, which they seem to do right now. And I think that's part of the reason why Reguilon thrived so much, was because it was the perfect role for him when he was there. And Lopetegui basically created a blueprint that really maximizes somebody like Reguilon. But I wonder, like, while that's a good thing that works for them, do you also think, just given the fact that we all know how they play, it's easier to plan for a game against them, like just going in the fact that we know how they're going to play?
Yes, Sevilla's offense is definitely more predictable, and it is at this point part of the Lopetegui system. Like, he actually believes in crossing as a way to push the opponent back. The kind of game that Lopetegui really likes is one where his team has most possession, they're bombing your box with a lot of crosses, and then they have the players who, again, this whole team is very physically very intense. They try to get the second ball and then recirculate the ball and try to cross again. And that's kind of the Lopetegui way of doing it. It's very brute force, though. It means you just sending crosses and then hoping for the best a bit. So it does get a bit predictable. It does get a bit easy to defend if you see it coming. But in the end, it's almost a war of attrition. Like, I think the hope of Lopetegui is that at some point after those 25 crosses, you only need to make a mistake on one, and then say Rafa Mir or En-Nesyri, when he's healthy, can get to that header and score.
So where do you, given the fact that the battle on the flanks and stopping their overloads is a key, like a very visible thing that's going to be, we have to figure out in the field, and we're going to be tracking that. Where else on the field do you think there are interesting matchups that, whether it's in midfield, whether it's elsewhere on the field apart from the fullback position? Like, where do you see a really interesting matchup brewing?